to Mo's Market Pulse. I'm your host, Sarah Mokriam, founder of Mo Digital Solutions, where we help businesses hit their revenue goals and thrive. On this podcast, we talk with industry leaders about their business, market trends, growth strategies, and what's ahead. Today's guest is Anthony Bay, founder and CEO of Techquity, a collective of senior technology leaders who leverage their deep experience to partner and advise CEOs and investors. They help solve complex tech challenges, enabling businesses to move faster, operate smarter, and gain a competitive edge through technology. So, Anthony, let's start with your journey and what brought you to this point. You've had an impressive career at tech giants like Amazon, Microsoft, and Apple. How did those experiences shape your leadership style and strategic thinking?
Well, hi. First of all, thank you for having me on your show. It probably starts earlier, if you will indulge me for a minute. I fell in love with computers in my early 20s, even though I was not a computer person. But with the power of computers to really augment people and in a lot of ways let people communicate. So how computers could be great tools, which my first computer was an Apple II. I bought a Mac when they came out, and then I went to work at Apple. That was kind of my passion. And so what I would have learned along the way, I've been amazingly fortunate to work for three of the most amazing companies in the world. Apple, Microsoft, and Amazon. And there's some great themes in all of those companies. I've also been on multiple boards. Public boards, private boards. I've been the CEO of a couple of small early stage companies. And so I think the themes in all of those are, in some sense, can really empower businesses to serve customers better, whether they're tech companies directly or whether they're companies using tech. And so the things that I was fortunate enough to experience are how things are done in world class companies, which really, for me, kind of helps you set a bar for what's possible. And so, those are the takeaways. But it also is you can never relax. I don't know if it was, I think Andy Grove said only the paranoid survive. But the success in the tech industry comes from just relentlessly focusing on innovation, embracing change, and high quality leadership on behalf of customers. So that may be an oversimplification, but really those for me are the main things.
Yeah. And what was the spark that led you to launch Techquity? What problem were you seeing in the market that you felt really needed solving?
So, thank you. Yeah, great question. Thanks. So it sort of builds on what I just said is, you have tech companies that people recognize, companies whose business is tech, but the vast majority of companies are companies that use tech, that are tech enabled, tech powered. And in order to successfully compete in the world we live in, this becomes more true every day. You need to understand how to be great at technology and for your own self, not necessarily, tech to sell to other people. And so that was really, I think, the genesis. But when you look at the world, the vast majority of CEOs and the vast majority of investors, venture capitalists and private equity firms, they're not tech people. They're very sophisticated. They're very good at what they do. They may know the markets very well. They may know the customers, but for the most part, they're not tech people. And so the biggest challenge in the vast majority of companies in the US, but this is true generally, and for investors in those companies is how do they get help? How do they get advice? How do they get guidance? How do they navigate the really complex tech challenges that you have from a leadership point of view in the sense of the team, process tech, everything else? And so just realizing that there wasn't a good resource for those people. You can try to hire a CTO, but that usually isn't enough. And if you're not a tech leader, you don't really have a good way to evaluate people. So the genesis for Techquity was there's this big need of companies who are trying to do really important work, so impact oriented things. And on the other side, there's a lot of people who get to a place in their career. The majority, I would say, are 50 plus, but not exclusively, some in their 40s, where you get to a place in life where you've been successful and you're looking for what's next. You can continue, I would say, my peers, broadly defined. You get to a place in life where you could continue to work at one of the big tech companies or one of the well-known tech companies and do fine, be very well paid, but you're a cog in a machine.
Right.
At some point, you've been there, done that. You can go join an earlier stage company as a C-suite executive. And in those cases, you're all in 60, 70 hours a week for however long it takes. You don't know. It's a lottery. Some of those work, some don't. You have to sign up for that kind of a journey and really make that kind of commitment. You can also start your own company, which is a version of that. Or what people often say is, well, what I really want to do, I want to be a consultant. I want to be an advisor. I'd really like to help companies. It's very hard to do alone. An individual in almost any business doesn't have scale. So the idea of Techquity was to basically be a firm that's a collective. We're a collective of that kind of senior talent, all tech executives on the tech side, primarily engineering, but some product folks. So not sales, marketing, not that those aren't super important, but that's not our core value. And so that was the genesis of Techquity. There's a lot of people who want to work with interesting companies and help the kind of people I saw and I described as the clients. And so that was it. That was, about 5 years. And we've been slowly word of mouth building ever since.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And if someone asked you what Techquity does in one sentence, how would you describe your mission and the type of companies that you help?
One sentence is always hard. So I will, I
I know
will,
you
uh,
can
I
use
will
more
try.
than one.
Well, we are builders and operators who've built things at scale. We behave as people's tech co-pilot. So we're your co-pilot. We're your co-pilot on the journey for the CEO and for the investors to help navigate all the challenges that you're going to have. Whether it's understanding whether your people fit, understanding your org, the tech decisions you're making, the vendors you're working with, everything. So our goal is to help companies execute excellently, and be their partner in that kind of an advisory co-pilot role. So we're more than consultants. We're not by nature consultants. We're all senior operating executives, and so it's the kind of people you could never hire, but you have access to. So
And are there
that's
certain industries that you target or prefer working with?
No, not really. Our value is more on companies that are trying to scale. So really early stage companies before they find product market fit. But where most companies fail is scaling for all kinds of reasons. So it's more about the nature of the stage of the company, the size of the opportunity. And so we're more focused on different tech capabilities than we are industries, whether it's AI or cybersecurity or leadership training or, a range of tech decisions, spending everything in that. So it's more about the different types of tech and how to apply them than it is the industries.
Okay, so I want to zoom out to the bigger picture just for a moment. What are some of the biggest shifts you're seeing in how companies are approaching AI and digital transformation in 2025?
It's a topic that gets written about all the time. It's so I think there's two parts of that. So I would say, in a sense, this is the continuation of a trend that has been going on for 30 years. All right. So if you think, and I don't mean in any ways to diminish it, but if you look at sort of what kicked off with the internet version one in the mid 90s, where companies who figured out how to use, if you will, internet technology in a broad sense, were able to redefine themselves, build new businesses, and serve customers. The next big wave of that was probably mobile, and the change in how people engaged in form factors. Cloud computing, kind of a return to centralized, was changed. All of these things massively broaden the opportunity for how tech can impact your business and the flexibility. Each one of those was a step change. And in a sense, AI is in that spirit, different in lots of ways, but in the spirit of dramatically increasing the way companies can serve their customers and leverage technology to add value. So there is no one size fits all, but there are some themes. So I think we have a Substack that we started a couple months ago, kind of probably done just about as many as you've done podcasts, and it's called Techquity Takes. So if you go to our website, you can find it. And so we've done a few about AI. So a couple of themes. One of the themes is what we call AI enhanced versus AI first. So the point of AI enhanced is the most straightforward things for companies to do is get on the learning curve. The number one imperative: get on the learning curve. You don't need millions of dollars worth of consulting advice and plans and strategies. You just have to start using the tools and exploring and looking for ways in which AI can make things better. People look at this in call centers or, in document, in doing research or coding. So there's a lot of relatively low hanging fruit and relatively inexpensive ways to start learning. And I would say that's step one. Every company needs to be doing that and not just have some person, hey, we've got, Susan and Susan's doing this. You need to figure out, and like all of these other generations, it's really important for the executives. You can't delegate this. You got to start playing with it so you intuitively understand. They're not scary. These tools, I mean, whether it's, ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot, there's so many options and the tech just keeps moving. The good news is these things get better every day. The pace of innovation here is faster than any of those other eras that I described. So that's kind of step one. Step two is you start looking, and step two in a broad sense, maybe phase two, is how can you create new products, services, fundamentally change things that we would call AI first. So
Mhm.
and those are ways, in most cases, they start with taking a look at the information you have as a company that's unique to you. Information about, the world you operate in, your customers, your products. And so the AI tools and services that are out there focus for the most part on public information. And so each company has private. So you have to be very careful and thoughtful that you don't accidentally give away your proprietary information. But we wrote a piece on this recently, which is you need to start thinking about your data and your intellectual property in your data as one of your core assets. For most companies, it's spread all over the place. It's in a bunch of different SaaS tools. It's not organized. But that's where, for most companies, the real interesting uses of AI I think, are going to come. So, but it's getting on the journey
Yeah.
and not getting too distracted by the hype about whether it's DeepSeek or some version. All of those are super relevant and super important, but for businesses, they don't change the themes that I just described.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a really great perspective. And I like how you kind of compared it to the different eras of the evolution that we've already seen. And this is just another one, right? That's coming up here.
It may be in many ways, more impactful, but I think people get lost sometimes in trying to, talk about how it compares, and in
Right.
some sense, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Is this bigger than mobile? Who cares? Is this bigger than cloud? Who cares? It really question is how do you use it's going for companies that don't pay attention. It's an existential risk. You already see that happening. So that's the thing, and that's true for boards in a lot of cases. Boards need to pay more attention.
Hmm.
In the last probably 5 or 6 years, there's been a lot of focus on security and cybersecurity, but that's more in a defensive sense. And, this is more in a, proactive offensive sense. But at board investor level, these are the existential things.
So, with so many different players offering tech consulting or advisory services, what do you think really sets Techquity apart in the market?
Great question. Thanks. So we don't come from a few things. So one of them is we're not fundamentally ourselves consultants by nature. We're all builders and operators. So, it's like getting someone who's a very experienced NFL quarterback to become an announcer. If you look at what happened recently, where again, I'm not comparing us to, Tom Brady or Tony Romo, but what you got was somebody who'd spent their life on the field and knew those things. And so when they went to talking about it, they brought a sense of understanding of what's going on that you wouldn't get from being an announcer. So not wrong, but different. And so, there's that. We are builders, operators who've been on the playing field in those big things. That's probably the first thing. The second thing is it's all just us. There are no junior partners. Most consulting firms are built on a pyramid of a small senior partners and then a bunch of more junior people, and the junior people do the work, and which is fine, but we're not that. We're just the principals work. We work on that basis. Our mission is to help companies, as I said, as a co-pilot. So we're in the cockpit with you when you want. We're there to help teach you how to fish and get your organization to a level of performance. So we're not trying to build ourselves in over a long period of time. A lot of consultants are kind of in an outsourcing model. They're more vendors than partners, I guess I would say. And our goal is not to do that. We're there for the CEO to help them succeed. I would say those are probably the basics.
Are there any emerging technologies or trends that you're particularly interested in, or on the flip side of that, that you think are being overhyped?
So one, I would talk about them as themes. There's a really interesting theme of open source, which is playing out in AI at the moment. You see, and it's in a variety of other disciplines. So there's this undercurrent of, I would say, open source. I hate to say versus closed, but I'll use the general term: open source versus closed. Although it gets talked about, what's accelerating the pace of innovation more than anything else is open source. You look at some of the main takeaways from DeepSeek is were the fact that it's open source. So it can be adopted, it can be modified. The way in which it approached the transformations can be copied by other people. So there's an iteration in open source. You saw this happening in cloud computing. The dominant operating system platform in cloud computing is Linux, but that's not really true inside of enterprises. So it's not that one is better than the other. It's that we're in this really interesting world where you get to see the pros and cons of open source, and I'll call it closed. That's a really interesting, I think, underlying theme, because it's around the pace of innovation. It also drives costs down. If you look at some of the biggest issues in AI have been just the costs of adoption because of the amazing amounts of capital that are being deployed, and yet the open source models are proving to rapidly the decline of spending in AI, decline of cost is way faster than Moore's law. So there'll probably be some AI law about capabilities versus cost. I don't think in a sense it's different than the themes about. It's kind of like what's under the hood.
Mhm.
The other things that are under the hood are this, thing I mentioned, which is companies that don't figure out how to use technology are just not going to do well. So there's this other theme, which is you can't, you have to become good at this.
Mhm.
So, I think that's it. I think this is another one of those waves and evolutions. The benefit we have is that we have a very competitive environment. On the cloud side, you have Google, Apple, not Google, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. Aggressively, you have IBM and Oracle in there too, but those are the three. A constant pace of innovation and speed. You're seeing the same thing in AI, and you're seeing a really interesting trend, which I would say one other thing I would mention is the productivity increase in coding is one of the most remarkable byproducts or outputs of AI. And David Sachs, who's controversial in his own way, but said this the other day. He said in his entire career, the limiting factor on tech was the number of great developers. That's changing. So yeah, you're going to see a pace of innovation because of the development tools that, makes it super interesting. So, again, I love this stuff. It's just, it gets faster and better and more impactful every day.
So let's talk about growth. Shifting gears here. What's been your most effective growth channel so far? Referrals, partnerships, just
Yeah,
networking, your
for
own
us.
personal.
Yeah. So because our business is a service, and it's delivered by people. It scales very differently than a product that you can whose marginal cost is close to zero. Our entire business is based around building trust, and so all of our business so far has frankly been referral or word of mouth. So our growth is more based on working with other firms that have compatible interests. Interestingly enough, search firms has been one of the most interesting ones for us, as and made sense in hindsight. Was sort of surprised in the beginning because they get brought in a lot of times to help these non-tech companies search for a tech leader. Okay, we're a whatever company, we need to find a good CTO or CPO. but they don't know how to interview those people because they don't have the skills of how, people don't always tell the truth. You can't always tell how effective they are. And so we end up helping companies with searches and interviews, job descriptions. We run the competency side of interviews for tech leaders for non-tech companies. So they do all the normal things they would do, but we'll basically say, all right, we'll go through, help them filter an interview and say, here's the pros and cons of this person from a tech leadership point of view. So that's been one. And then investment firms where we do a lot of work on diligence, pre-investment diligence or assessments of portfolio companies that have problems.
Mhm.
And so, they all know each other. A lot of them know each other. So, we've helped a number of companies that ended up, well, A, raising money, or B, getting sold by getting in and analyzing, okay, what's going on? What do you need to fix? How can we, who needs to do something? How can we help? So word of mouth and referrals been our biggest. We're starting to reach out more, Substack, we're thinking of podcasts like you're doing, and just to kind of build awareness for the expertise that's in our little group.
Yeah, do you think that the traditional kind of marketing playbook works really for this sort of high-end advisory service that you have? Or do you think that it is better off with more of these kind of relationship-driven approaches?
Well, I would say it's a hybrid. Sort of classic marketing is how do you build awareness, which
Mhm.
still applies? How do you build consideration? And then how do you build engagement? And so those premises and tenets apply. They're different. We don't need a celebrity endorsement. So it's different, but it's still the same thing. So going on podcasts, thank you for having me, starting to get the word out more so that people know we exist. The biggest single thing we've heard, the thing I've heard over and over is, I didn't know someone like you existed. And by the time we find clients, in a lot of cases, they're desperate or they have serious problems, and it's very hard to tell where to turn.
Mhm. Yeah,
So it's that same classic, but, filtered, organized for us.
you're right. How do you approach positioning Techquity in a way that really resonates with CEOs and investors specifically?
Great. Another great question. That's something, frankly, we've been evolving and working on. There isn't really, um, I, I, there isn't really another firm like this. There are certainly firms with great people, but a firm organized the way we are, focused the way we are, we haven't seen anything like this. And so therefore, because it's, in a sense, it's new, this idea of how do we be your co-pilot? How do we ride along? How do we help you with this range of things? How do we step in and take the wheel sometimes for a few months when you need help? So we've been evolving that, listening to feedback from clients about what they like and what works, and how do they, classic, is learning from customers what they like. But
Nice.
it's, like I said, it's not a common thing out there, to get this kind of help from these kind of people. So that's been our biggest opportunity and challenge, is that.
Yeah. So, of course, like you just mentioned, every journey comes with hurdles and challenges. What are some of the most common technology frustrations or roadblocks that your clients come to you with? I know you mentioned a couple earlier, but are there any others that you're kind of seeing as a theme?
So I would say there's a couple of themes that apply generally. One of them is lack of a really strong product oriented function, which decides what to build and how to prioritize features working backwards from customers. Too many times you end up companies focus more on the how than the what.
Mm.
What is it that you're kind of back to this AI question, but it's true in a lot of cases. You have to look at your company and say, what is our unique value proposition? What is it that we can do for customers better than anyone else? How do we prioritize and focus on that? Because very often people try to do too much and they don't do anything well. So there's kind of this theme. Amazon calls it working backwards, but that theme of, I think a strong product function is often undervalued, because people are focused on, okay, engineering and which AI are we using and which cloud provider. And so what is probably the first most important thing? The how, which comes into the engineering and the organization, a combination of things. Not surprisingly, if I was going to pick a single issue, it's organization and leadership. You know, do you have leaders that are well suited to the challenge you have,
Mhm.
who understand building the kinds of products you want, who understand scaling, and have the right background to do that? And and then how do you design organizations to be effective? A lot of themes, if you look across tech companies, they say it differently, but Amazon calls them single-threaded leaders. You need clear ownership, clear accountability. A lot of times there's too much of a matrix and two committees and it's all over the place. And so those things, are really important. And then, setting up a development process and a feature change that's rapid and iterative so that that you can iterate and change, and then being smart about the tech decisions you make, so you're not locked into any particular vendor. There's a lot of choice, but you also have to be smart about spending.
Mhm.
A lot of companies, we often get brought in or asked because they intuitively feel like they're spending too much money or the organization's too big. But if I was going to say, it's really starting with what, and then the how has a lot to do with who and how they're organized, and then the how of actually executing process, that flow. And if I was going to say, those tend to be the biggest challenges. I'm simplifying it because those are tricky to work through, but ultimately, I would say those are the anchors and foundations. And then back to what I said earlier, which is, you don't want to be on the bleeding edge. You don't need to, but you need to be on the early curve. You need to be learning. You need to be testing. You need a rapid cycle. You can't take 2 years to figure out to ship something. And so there's this learning to be agile in all kinds of broad senses and keeping current. That's critical.
Mhm. And so when it comes now to internal challenges, what's been one of the toughest parts about building and scaling Techquity?
Also, great questions. I would say a few different things. We've been learning about how to refine this idea of being a co-pilot and being able to help with different things. So, our learning curve, like any company, on finding what I would call product market fit for us. That's been an evolution, and we've learned along the way. Another thing is, not everyone is cut out to be an advisor like this. There's a number of people who really want to build things, or really want to be, if you will, in a sports metaphor, they can't be a coach. They're a player. They can't transition to being, not everybody can do that. So you have a culture fit. We are very thoughtful and careful. We have tenets about people. So we want people who are collaborative, who are focused on building trust and over delivering, and have the right personality. There's a lot of people who can have a destructive personality that, so we don't want those people around. Kind of tuning that. And then, there's another Amazon phrase, which is raising the bar. So you want everybody that joins to raise the bar in some way. So we've been building this collective, but it's a collective of people. We're not employees, so we're a collective of people that work together on projects and balance other things in their life. One of the unique things about Techquity is we um, it is, I hate to say work life balance because that's not the right term, but we have people who are involved in nonprofits, or may have some other coaching work they do, or are passionate skiers or hikers. And so there's model includes flexibility for people, because when you get to the level of talent we're talking about, the thing they're looking for is an opportunity to be all in when they're all in on these projects. But if they want to go spend 2 months hiking in somewhere, then they want to go do that. The challenge really is, it's also a difference between us and some of the more classic firms, is we're balancing capacity, I guess is what I would say.
I love that model though, especially with all of your experience. I'm sure that is important to be able to have that balance. And like you said, once you're on a project, you're fully on.
That is the other big thing, is, and it's related to, can people be a coach, but it is when Yeah, you need to be all in and over deliver for anything that you choose to do. And so that's part of the magic because these are all people who, in some sense, don't need to work. They're not, they're, and they've reached that point in life where they're working because they want to work. They want to be part of a team. They want to stay relevant. They're not done. They want to make an impact. But, you have to balance. And so, yeah,
That
but
makes
it's
sense.
fun.
Yeah. Has there ever been a moment where you questioned the model or had to pivot based on unexpected market feedback?
Yeah, in the early stages, we were more focused on earlier stage companies in the very beginning of Techquity, and where we actually said, "Hey, look, we will help, we will be your tech team, we'll be your product person and your engineering leader, and we'll build the engineers, and then we'll hand them off to you." So the original model was we'll kind of build these things and then hand them off. So we'll help de-risk that early phase. And for a bunch of reasons that didn't work. It's hiring people who are then going to go work for someone else. And also very early stage companies, the problems there, we found that we're best at helping companies scale. And the 0 to 1 is not the sweet spot for us. It's the 1 to 1 million. Or 100 to 1 million. So that was some of the learning we were focused on. And so we changed the model to this, we evolved, after a couple of years to this advisory co-pilot model where we're helping them build a team themselves. We're helping them pick the leaders. We're helping them make decisions. We're not doing it for them.
So then they can
Yeah.
take that and continue on
Yeah,
post
it's
their
theirs.
engagement with you.
It's theirs. Yeah, you don't have that weird transition. People know what they're doing. And so yeah, that was a big one for us, that we learned yeah, so pivot.
So, looking ahead, I'd love to get a glimpse into what's next for you and your team. What are your top priorities or growth goals for Techquity over the next 12 months?
So, we've talked about a lot of the things. We have found what we feel is a good fit, product market fit. We've identified what is really a massive market of CEOs and leaders and teams and investors who could benefit from access to this group of people. And so the biggest thing for us in the next 12 months is carefully, thoughtfully scaling,
Mhm.
building relationships with, right now, there's more leverage for us and for them with like private equity firms who have multiple portfolio companies. So we get in, build trust, help them with investment decisions, help them with their companies. So we're in that phase of continuing to grow clients, and both on the investor and the direct lead of the CEO side, and then continue to be thoughtfully scaling our own firm. So we want to kind of keep those in balance. But it's a remarkable opportunity. There's so many companies trying to do really important, great things, that we can help. So it's not a lack of opportunity. It's really a matter of how do we effectively keep the value prop and being able to deliver. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. Are there any specific KPIs or milestones that you're tracking closely to measure your progress?
Yeah, in a weird sense, the number of satisfied clients and their willingness to be a reference.
Yeah.
Like anyone, we're looking at revenue and things like that. But in our case, the core things really come down to how well we're doing. Where do where we are successful? What is that? Where it hasn't worked as well? What do we learn? And then where are the other things that we can help with? So I would say that the KPIs, there's quantitative ones, but that any business would have. But I think the more interesting ones for us are qualitative. It's not just how many customers we have and can we get 10 more clients this year. It's really related to zeroing in on how do we fine tune our effectiveness, and then when we find areas of need, how can we add more capacity in those areas. So that's another one. We're looking potentially to expand a little more into the UK and Europe. Right now, primarily US based. So we, do so carefully. But that's it. So the KPIs, classic things, clients and revenue and profit and margin. But the other ones are really more, I would say in a sense, more critical.
Mhm. So, one question I like to ask at the end is if you could offer one piece of advice to fellow tech leaders trying to, navigate change and scale smart in today's market, or just starting out, even, what would your advice be?
quote tech leaders like us, or more, if you will, people in tech, or people who are in the kind of clients I described? Which of those two?
I would love to hear both if you have it.
Okay, so I think the piece of advice for CEOs and investors, I've said different ways in this conversation, which is there's a firm out there that can help you. Doing this alone just increases your risk of failure. And so, don't be shy, take advantage of help. That's kind of one. The second is related to that is you need to be not on the bleeding edge, but you need to be testing, experimenting, getting better all the time because your competitors there are competitors out there, even ones that may not exist yet, who are doing that. So you can never get complacent. I think for people inside of tech, I think it's different at different stages of people's career. Now, the world we're in right now, evolving a career is a bit different. When the idea of virtual remote work didn't exist. Now it does, and I think one of the challenges when you're working along in your I would say late 20s, 30s, 40s is how do you chart a path so that you can balance this whole what's virtual, what's in person, because there's a lot of benefits in both. People polarize. It's like to work is bad. Well, it's not. It's just different. And in some, in a lot of situations, that in particular for younger people, you miss out on the mentoring. And then at some point there's I think when people get to this moment, we call it and it's not true for everyone, but we call it a zero to prove moment. When you get to that point in your career where you're like, all right, I'm going to focus on what matters most to me professionally versus doing what somebody else wants to pay me for.
Hmm.
And there's have to get enough experience to be able to do that, and that moment may not come for everyone, but at some point you get to the point where you got to own your own path. And that's what's true for a lot of us, is that moment where we say, I want to be involved, I want to be engaged, I want to be committed, but I kind of want to do it more on my own terms.
Hmm.
And that, I think, is being thinking about what those terms would be
Hmm.
for people.
Yeah. So thank you so much. This has been a really great conversation. For those who want to learn more about Techquity or connect with you, where's the best place?
Sure. We are Techquity, Techquity.ai. That's the website. Find us on LinkedIn. And I'm Abay, Abay, at Techquity.ai. So either of
Perfect.
those.
Sounds good. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to Mo's Market Pulse. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave us a comment, and join us again to hear more insights from leaders coming up on future episodes. Thank you again, Anthony, for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.